Welcome back to Globewise Entertainment, your home for the most shocking, controversial, and unforgettable stories from the world of cinema. In today's video, we're diving into a list that many people didn't even know existed, 12 movies we are not allowed to watch anymore. These aren't just films, they're titles that pushed boundaries, broke rules, and in some cases, disappeared from public access due to their extreme content, controversy, or cultural backlash. From disturbing storytelling to scenes that sparked global outrage, each movie on this list has a story behind why it became so infamous. And before we begin, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Globewise Entertainment so you never miss our deep dives into hidden, banned, and controversial cinema. Now tell us in the comments, which movie do you think will shock you the most? Let's get into it. 12. The Crying Game, 1992. Long before shocking twists became common in modern cinema, The Crying Game stunned audiences with a reveal so unexpected that it instantly became one of the most talked-about movies of the 1990s. Directed by Neil Jordan, this psychological drama mixed romance, politics, betrayal, and identity into a film that many viewers still consider impossible to categorize. The story follows Fergus, a former IRA operative haunted by guilt after a mission goes horribly wrong. Trying to escape his violent past, he travels to London and meets the mysterious and captivating Dill, played by Jay Davidson. What begins as a slow-burning emotional connection soon transforms into one of cinema's most controversial moments. A scene so shocking at the time that audiences reportedly gasped in theaters around the world. But The Crying Game wasn't banned because of gore or violence. The controversy came from how boldly it challenged traditional ideas about gender, sexuality, and identity during an era when mainstream Hollywood rarely touched those subjects. In the early 1990s, many critics praised the film as groundbreaking, while others attacked it for being too provocative for general audiences. The movie became a cultural phenomenon almost overnight. Viewers were warned not to spoil its famous twist, creating one of the first viral word-of-mouth campaigns in film history. Yet decades later, modern audiences continue debating whether the film was ahead of its time or problematic by today's standards. Some critics now argue that the movie's handling of transgender identity feels outdated, while others defend it as a landmark film that pushed mainstream cinema into conversations society was afraid to have. That debate has kept The Crying Game alive for more than 30 years, not as a forgotten scandal, but as a movie that forced audiences to confront uncomfortable questions about love, identity, and prejudice. Even now, many streaming platforms promote it cautiously because its themes still spark intense online discussions. Whether viewers see it as daring art or controversial storytelling, one thing is undeniable. The Crying Game remains one of the most unforgettable films audiences were never expected to fully understand. 11. Soul Man, 1986. Imagine waking up one morning so desperate for success that you're willing to become someone else entirely. That's the outrageous setup behind Soul Man, one of the most controversial comedy films of the 1980s, a movie many audiences today consider impossible to remake. The story follows Mark Watson, a wealthy but spoiled college student whose parents suddenly cut him off financially just before he's supposed to attend Harvard Law School. Terrified of losing his dream, Mark comes up with a shocking plan. After discovering a scholarship intended for black students, he uses tanning pills to darken his skin and pretends to be African American in order to receive financial aid. At first, Mark thinks it's all a harmless shortcut. But as he moves through campus disguised as another race, he begins experiencing discrimination, prejudice, and social hostility for the very first time. What starts as a reckless comedy slowly turns into a story about identity, privilege, and uncomfortable truths. Back in 1986, the film sparked immediate backlash for its use of racial stereotypes and blackface-style transformation. Critics accused the movie of trivializing racism, while others argued it was attempting, awkwardly, to deliver a social message through satire. Decades later, Soul Man has become one of those Hollywood films that regularly appears on lists of movies you could never make today. Yet despite the controversy, the film remains a fascinating time capsule of 1980s Hollywood, an era when studios often pushed risky concepts without fully understanding the cultural consequences. Some viewers see it as offensive and outdated, while others believe it was trying, however clumsily, to criticize racial inequality through comedy. What makes Soul Man so unforgettable isn't just the controversy, it's the uncomfortable conversation it still creates. The movie forces audiences to ask a difficult question. Can satire about sensitive topics survive when the execution crosses a line? Whether remembered as a misguided comedy or a bold social experiment that failed, Soul Man continues to spark debate nearly 4 decades later, proving that some films never truly disappear from pop culture history. 10. Junior, 1994. What happens when a movie once marketed as a light-hearted family comedy suddenly becomes one of the internet's most debated films decades later? That's exactly what happened with Junior, the bizarre, unforgettable 1994 comedy starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Danny DeVito, and Emma Thompson. At the time of its release, Junior was seen as a harmless Hollywood experiment. The story followed scientist Dr. Alex Hesse, played by Schwarzenegger, who becomes the first man ever to carry a pregnancy after a secret medical trial goes unexpectedly right. The film mixed slapstick humor, emotional moments, and fish-out-of-water comedy into one strange but memorable package. And honestly, audiences in the 1990s didn't know what to make of it. Seeing the world's biggest action hero, the same man who dominated screens in Terminator 2, Judgment Day and Predator, suddenly dealing with mood swings, cravings, and maternity clothes felt almost surreal. Critics were divided, but curiosity alone turned the movie into a massive conversation piece. Fast forward to today, and Junior has become one of those films people claim could never be made now. Not because it was offensive in the traditional sense, but because modern audiences endlessly argue over how the film handles gender roles, biology, masculinity, and comedy. Online debates exploded years later, with some viewers calling the movie strangely progressive for its time, while others insisted Hollywood would avoid touching this concept entirely in today's climate. Ironically, that controversy gave the movie a second life. Clips from Junior constantly resurface online, generating millions of views as younger audiences discover just how unbelievably weird mainstream 1990s cinema could be. One minute it feels like a heartfelt family comedy, and the next, you're watching Arnold Schwarzenegger attending prenatal appointments while trying to hide a scientifically impossible pregnancy from the world. That sheer absurdity is exactly why people still talk about it. But beyond the controversy and internet debates, Junior represents something Hollywood rarely risks anymore: big-budget studios taking chances on completely unpredictable ideas. Imagine pitching this movie today. An action superstar becomes pregnant in a comedy drama directed by a major filmmaker. Executives would probably panic before the meeting even ended. Yet somehow, in the 1990s, this film actually happened. And whether audiences love it, hate it, or simply watch it out of disbelief, Junior remains one of the strangest major studio releases ever made, a movie that went from forgotten comedy to cultural curiosity decades after its release. 9. Revenge of the Nerds, 1984. What happens when the ultimate underdogs decide they've had enough? That's the wild setup behind Revenge of the Nerds, the outrageous 1984 college comedy that became one of the most talked-about cult movies of the 80s. Packed with unforgettable one-liners, chaotic pranks, and nerdy heroes fighting back against arrogant jocks, the film was once celebrated as a feel-good underdog classic. But decades later, audiences began revisiting some of its scenes with a very different perspective. The story follows a group of socially awkward students who are constantly bullied by the powerful Alpha Beta fraternity on campus. Tired of humiliation, the nerds form their own fraternity and launch an all-out rebellion filled with crazy revenge schemes, hilarious sabotage, and over-the-top comedy moments that defined 1980s Hollywood. Back then, audiences loved its rebellious spirit and quirky humor, helping the movie become a major box office success and a pop culture phenomenon. But in modern times, Revenge of the Nerds has become deeply controversial. Critics and viewers now point to scenes involving hidden cameras, inappropriate deception, and questionable behavior that today would never be treated as harmless comedy. One particular scene has sparked years of debate online, with many arguing the film crossed serious ethical boundaries while presenting them as jokes. Because of this, the movie is frequently discussed as an example of how comedy standards have drastically changed over the decades. Despite the controversy, the film's legacy remains enormous. It inspired sequels, merchandise, and helped shape the entire nerds versus jocks comedy formula used in countless movies afterward. Some fans still defend it as a product of its era, while others believe it represents outdated Hollywood attitudes that should stay in the past. That clash of opinions is exactly why Revenge of the Nerds continues to spark heated conversations even today. Whether you see it as a hilarious cult classic or a movie that aged terribly, there's no denying its impact on comedy history. It's one of those films that forces modern audiences to ask a difficult question. Should older movies be judged by the standards of their time or by the standards of today? 8. Powder, 1995. Imagine being born different, so different that the world fears you before it even understands you. That's the haunting power behind Powder, one of the most controversial and emotionally charged films of the 1990s. Directed by Victor Salva, the movie tells the story of Jeremy Reed, a pale, mysterious teenager with extraordinary intelligence and almost supernatural abilities. Hidden away from society for most of his life, Jeremy steps into a cruel world that treats him like a monster instead of a miracle. At first glance, Powder feels like a touching sci-fi drama about bullying, fear, and humanity. But beneath its emotional storytelling lies the controversy that caused the film to become almost forbidden in Hollywood conversations. The backlash wasn't only about the movie itself. It centered around the troubled reputation of its director, which sparked outrage among audiences and critics alike. Over the years, many viewers refused to support the film, and television broadcasts became increasingly rare. Still, despite the controversy, Powder developed a cult following because of its unforgettable atmosphere and heartbreaking message. The movie asks a chilling question. What happens when humanity destroys the very people who might understand life better than we do? Jeremy's emotional journey, from isolation to tragic acceptance, hits even harder today in a world still struggling with intolerance and fear of those who are different. Visually, the film creates an eerie beauty with stormy skies, glowing cinematography, and emotional performances that linger long after the credits roll. The emotional intensity, combined with its themes of cruelty, loneliness, and human prejudice, helped Powder become one of the most debated films of its era. Whether audiences see it as a misunderstood masterpiece or a movie overshadowed by controversy, one thing is certain: Powder remains a film many people feel uncomfortable revisiting, and that's exactly why it continues to fascinate movie fans decades later. 7. The Bonfire of the Vanities, 1990. What happens when Hollywood takes one of the most explosive novels ever written and turns it into a disaster so infamous that audiences still debate it decades later? Directed by Brian De Palma and starring heavyweights like Tom Hanks, Bruce Willis, and Melanie Griffith, The Bonfire of the Vanities was supposed to be the next great Hollywood satire. Instead, it became one of the most controversial cinematic train wrecks ever released. Based on the best-selling novel by Tom Wolfe, the story follows Sherman McCoy, a wealthy Wall Street businessman whose perfect life spirals out of control after a late-night accident in New York City. What begins as a single moment of panic quickly explodes into a media circus involving race, politics, greed, corruption, and public humiliation. At the time, the film was considered dangerously provocative because it exposed the ugly side of America's elite class. It mocked the obsession with wealth, social status, tabloid journalism, and political opportunism in a way many audiences found deeply uncomfortable. Critics argued that the movie hit too close to home during an era dominated by Wall Street excess and media sensationalism. But the real controversy came from the casting and creative decisions. Fans of the original novel were furious that Hollywood softened the story's darker themes and changed major character dynamics. Many believed the film watered down the sharp racial and political commentary that made the book so powerful in the first place. The backlash was brutal. When the movie finally hit theaters, critics attacked it relentlessly. Some called it one of the greatest misfires in Hollywood history. Others claimed it represented everything wrong with big-budget studio filmmaking, massive egos, tone-deaf storytelling, and fear of controversy. Over time, The Bonfire of the Vanities became more than just a failed movie. It became a symbol of Hollywood excess itself, a cautionary tale about what happens when studios try to sanitize dangerous art for mainstream audiences. Today, the film is rarely discussed alongside other major dramas of its era, yet its themes feel eerily modern. Media outrage, public scandals, political manipulation, and class warfare dominate headlines even now, making this forgotten controversy more relevant than ever. Some viewers still see it as an underrated satire buried beneath studio interference. Others consider it a cinematic disaster that should never have happened. Either way, The Bonfire of the Vanities remains one of the most infamous, forbidden Hollywood stories audiences can't stop revisiting. 6. The Basketball Diaries, 1995. Before Leonardo DiCaprio became the king of Hollywood blockbusters, he delivered one of the darkest and most emotionally devastating performances of his career in The Basketball Diaries. Based on the real-life memoir of writer and musician Jim Carroll, the film follows a gifted teenage basketball player whose dreams slowly collapse under the weight of addiction, violence, and self-destruction. Set in the gritty streets of New York City, the movie begins with youthful energy, friendship, and ambition. Jim is talented, charismatic, and full of life. But as temptation creeps in, the story takes a brutal turn into drug abuse and psychological collapse. What makes the film so shocking even today is how realistically it portrays the downward spiral of addiction. There are no glamorous moments here, only desperation, fear, and heartbreak. One scene in particular became infamous for its disturbing intensity, helping the movie earn a controversial reputation over the years. Critics praised the film's raw honesty, but many audiences found its themes too dark and emotionally exhausting. Over time, The Basketball Diaries became one of those movies people describe as hard to watch, not because it fails, but because it succeeds too well at showing pain and destruction. The film also sparked controversy after tragic real-world events in the late 1990s, when some media outlets wrongfully tried to connect violent behavior to dark movies and entertainment. Although those claims were heavily criticized, the controversy added an almost forbidden aura around the film, making it one of the most talked-about edgy dramas of its era. Today, The Basketball Diaries survives as a cult classic that still shocks new viewers with its emotional realism and fearless storytelling. It's not just a movie about addiction, it's about lost innocence, broken dreams, and how quickly a promising life can spiral out of control. And decades later, it remains one of Leonardo DiCaprio's most haunting performances ever captured on film. 5. Song of the South, 1946. The Disney film that vanished from sight. In the golden era of Disney, long before CGI worlds and billion-dollar franchises, there was a film that once carried the full weight of the studio's hope, and later became one of its most controversial disappearances. That film was Song of the South. When it was first released in 1946, Song of the South was praised for its groundbreaking blend of live-action storytelling and animation. It introduced audiences to the charming animated character Br Rabbit and featured the Oscar-winning song Zip-a-Dee-Da-Da, which went on to become a Disney anthem for joy and optimism. But behind its cheerful music and colorful animation, the film carried elements that later sparked intense criticism and debate. As decades passed, cultural perspectives shifted. What was once seen as harmless storytelling began to be viewed through a far more critical lens. Many viewers and scholars raised concerns about how the film portrayed life in the American South, leading to growing controversy around its themes and representation. Instead of editing or re-releasing it, Disney made a decision that shocked fans and collectors alike. The film would gradually disappear from public availability. It was never officially released on modern streaming platforms like Disney+, and home video releases became extremely rare and discontinued. Over time, Song of the South transformed from a family musical into something else entirely, a lost Disney film that people could hear about, read about, but rarely, if ever, legally watch. Today, it exists more as a piece of film history and debate than entertainment. Clips surface in documentaries, discussions continue among film historians, and curiosity only grows stronger as new generations discover its existence. What makes it so fascinating is not just the film itself, but what it represents, how cinema, culture, and public perception can change the fate of even the biggest studio releases. And that is why Song of the South remains one of the most talked about, forbidden Disney films of all time, not because it was erased, but because it was quietly pulled out of reach. 4. The Human Centipede, 2009. The film that crossed every line. When people talk about movies that should not exist, one title always comes up in whispers: The Human Centipede. Released in 2009 and directed by Tom Six, this film didn't just shock audiences, it divided the entire horror world. The Human Centipede, first sequence, follows a disturbing fictional experiment that pushes the boundaries of medical horror into deeply uncomfortable territory. But what truly made it infamous wasn't just its story, it was the idea behind it. Many viewers walked out, critics called it depraved, and others labeled it one of the most disturbing horror concepts ever put on screen. Across different countries, the film faced heavy censorship, restrictions, and in some cases, outright bans or edited versions just to be allowed for release. Even among horror fans, it became a challenge movie, something people watched just to test their limits, only to regret it afterward. But controversy has a strange effect in cinema. The more people said, "Don't watch it," the more curiosity grew. It became a viral underground sensation, proving that sometimes the most banned ideas in film history are the ones audiences never stop searching for. A movie that was never meant to be comfortable, only unforgettable. 3. Begotten, 1989. The film that looks like it was never meant to survive. There are movies you watch, and then there are movies that feel like they were unearthed, not created. Begotten is one of those rare cinematic experiences that doesn't behave like a normal film at all. Shot entirely in grainy, high-contrast black and white, it looks less like a movie and more like a lost, decaying reel pulled from some forgotten archive of human nightmares. There is no dialogue in the traditional sense. No clear narration. No comforting structure to hold on to. Instead, the film opens with an unsettling image, a grotesque figure performing a ritual of self-destruction, as if reality itself is being torn open frame by frame. From that moment on, the viewer is no longer watching a story, they are enduring it. Directed by Elias Murridge, Begotten pushes the boundaries of what cinema even is. It abandons clarity on purpose. Every frame feels corrupted, as if time itself has been damaged. This is what makes it so controversial, and why it has often been labeled unwatchable by casual audiences. But here's the truth, it's not banned in a legal sense. It's something far more interesting. It's self-restricting. Most viewers simply can't continue. The film filters its own audience, leaving only those willing to sit inside discomfort without explanation. As the story unfolds, we witness symbolic cycles of death, birth, violence, and decay, though none of it is presented in a way you can easily decode. It feels like mythology from a civilization that never existed, or perhaps one that existed long before human language was formed. And that's where its reputation was born. People don't recommend it casually. They warn each other about it. Not because it's offensive in a traditional sense, but because it lingers. It sticks in the mind long after the screen goes dark, like something you can't quite unsee. In the world of forbidden, or not allowed, films, Begotten doesn't rely on censorship or controversy. It relies on something stronger, psychological resistance. It dares the viewer to keep watching when every instinct says to look away. And for those who do make it to the end, there's no reward. Only silence. 2. Gummo, 1997. Some movies don't just tell a story, they feel like they've been pulled from a place most people never want to visit again. Gummo is one of those films. Directed by Harmony Korine, this 1997 cult shock drama doesn't follow a traditional plot. Instead, it drags viewers into the broken, dusty remains of Xenia, Ohio after a devastating tornado. But what you see isn't disaster in the Hollywood sense, it's what comes after society quietly gives up. There are no heroes here. No clear beginning, middle, or end. Just fragments of life, teenagers wandering through abandoned houses, kids selling scrap metal for fast food money, and unsettling moments that feel more like documentary footage than fiction. It's raw, uncomfortable, and intentionally chaotic. What made Gummo infamous wasn't just its content, it was how real it felt. Many viewers left the film disturbed, confused, even angry. Some critics called it genius, others called it exploitation. Over the years, it developed a reputation as a film people recommend, but rarely rewatch. And that's where the not allowed myth begins. Not because it was officially banned everywhere, but because it pushes so far past comfort zones that it almost feels like something you shouldn't be watching. It's the kind of movie that gets whispered about in online forums, traded like a challenge. Can you sit through it? Gummo remains one of cinema's most controversial experiences, not for what it shows, but for how it makes you feel after the screen goes dark. And once you've seen it, you understand why some people say it's not a movie you simply watch. It's a movie you survive. 1. Taxidermia, 2006. A film that crossed the line of too much cinema. There are movies that entertain you, movies that confuse you, and then there are films like Taxidermia, 2006, which feel less like a story and more like a challenge thrown at the audience. When this Hungarian surreal drama first appeared on the festival circuit, it didn't just shock viewers, it unsettled them on a deeper level. Not because it relied on jump scares or violence in the traditional sense, but because it pushed human experience into extremes that most films never dare to explore. The movie follows 3 generations of a family, each trapped in their own disturbing obsession. One is consumed by physical desire, another by overindulgence, and the last by a haunting pursuit of preservation, both of flesh and memory. Instead of presenting these stories as separate, the film connects them like a warped evolutionary chain, suggesting that human instincts don't evolve, they intensify. What made Taxidermia controversial wasn't just its imagery, it was its honesty. It reflects parts of humanity that society prefers to ignore: excess, decay, and the uncomfortable relationship between body and identity. Many audiences walked out during screenings, not because they were scared, but because they felt confronted in a way they didn't expect. Over time, the film gained a reputation that borders on legend. Some countries restricted its distribution. Others avoided mainstream release entirely. Even today, it remains one of those titles that rarely appears in casual recommendation lists, not because it is banned everywhere, but because it sits in a gray zone of taste, tolerance, and discomfort. And that's where its reputation was born. Taxidermia isn't a film you watch in the traditional sense. It's a film you endure, analyze, and sometimes even question after the credits roll. It forces you to ask, how far can cinema go before it stops being entertainment and starts becoming an experience you can't easily forget? For many viewers, the answer was simple: they didn't want to go that far again. And that is exactly why Taxidermia, 2006, still earns its place on every list of movies we are not really allowed to watch anymore, not by law, but by comfort itself. And that wraps up our countdown of 12 movies we are not allowed to watch anymore. Some of these films pushed boundaries, some challenged what cinema is capable of showing, and others simply became too controversial for their own good. But one thing is clear, each movie on this list left a mark that can't be ignored. Now we want to hear from you. Which one shocked you the most, and which movie do you think deserves to be on this list but wasn't included? Drop your thoughts in the comment section below. We read every single one. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the darker side of cinema, don't forget to subscribe to Globewise Entertainment for more controversial stories, hidden film secrets, and unforgettable movie breakdowns. Until next time, keep watching, keep questioning, and we'll see you in the next one.